The storm rolled in fast over Queens, cloaking the city in thick gray rain. Thunder echoed in the distance, and the window panes of the small apartment rattled with each gust of wind. Inside, Laura sat cross-legged on the floor beside the old space heater, a thick medical textbook open in her lap. Her long blonde hair was twisted into a messy bun, strands sticking to her forehead. A cup of instant noodles sat untouched beside her, now soggy and cold. She was still in her scrubs from clinical rotation, a hoodie thrown over them for warmth. Her final exam was in the morning, clinical diagnostics, the last obstacle before graduation. She had been studying for hours, yet nothing seemed to be sticking. The words blurred together as she ran a highlighter across the same line 3 times, eyes glazed from exhaustion. She'd been pulling double shifts at the hospital cafeteria to make rent, and the fatigue was catching up with her. Her phone rang, cutting through the drumming of rain. The screen read Rachel. Laura answered on the first ring. Rachel's voice was shaky, strained. I fell. Laura, I can't stand. Laura straightened immediately, alert. What happened? I was working and I slipped. My ankle, it's bad. I don't think I can go to my next shift. What shift? The new client in Westchester. Tonight's the trial, first night. There was a long pause on the line. You want me to go? Please, Laura, just this once. I have an exam at 8:00 a.m. I know. Rachel's voice turned pleading. I'm sorry, but I can't lose this one. It's a mansion, Laura. Rich clients, regular hours. If I cancel tonight, it's over before it starts. Laura pressed her fingers against her eyes, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Ever since their parents' car accident 8 years ago, she'd been the one holding everything together, working through undergrad while raising a teenage Rachel, somehow managing to get into medical school while helping her sister find her footing. And now, just as she was about to cross the finish line, you said it was just a trial, right? They've never seen you before. They don't know what you look like. Rachel's voice brightened slightly. You can go as me. Uniform's clean, ID's in the pocket. You just have to show up, do the basics, and leave. Laura stood up and began pacing the tiny apartment. You know I'm not a cleaner. You know enough, Rachel replied quickly. You've helped me before. It's nothing fancy. Wipe down the surfaces, tidy up a bit, maybe a couple of bedrooms. That's it. Laura looked around the apartment they shared. Their backpacks hung on the back of the door. A single coat rack by the fridge held both of their jackets. One cracked window was stuffed with old towels to block the draft. Rachel's ankle was likely swelling fast. She was alone and still thinking about work. Fine, I'll go. Really? The relief in Rachel's voice was palpable. Laura ended the call without replying. She moved quickly, knowing she would lose her nerve if she thought too long. In the bathroom, she found the pressed gray uniform and plastic-wrapped ID hanging from the hook. She stripped out of her hoodie and scrubs and changed. It was a little big on her, but not enough to matter. The ID clipped to the front read R. Martinez. She tightened her ponytail and splashed cold water on her face. At the front door, she pulled on her boots and raincoat, grabbed her umbrella, bent barely usable, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit her like a slap, and the umbrella nearly flipped in her hand. She forced it upright and ran to the subway water, already seeping into her shoes. On the platform, she checked the address Rachel had sent. Hawthorne Lane, Westchester, a neighborhood far removed from their world. As the train pulled in, she stepped inside, soaking wet, heart pounding. She clutched her bag to her chest and tried not to think about her exam tomorrow. Just tonight, just one favor, then back to studying, then back to her life. The cab rolled to a quiet stop at the edge of a long, curved driveway. Laura stepped out into the rain, the estate rising before her like something out of a forgotten dream. The house was massive. Stone columns, tall windows, slate roof, dark with water. But there was something strange in its stillness. The lights glowed, yes, but dimly, as if the house were asleep. Not warm, not alive. She clutched the handle of her umbrella as she approached the heavy wooden door, her heart thundering louder than the storm. Before she could knock, the door creaked open. A tall man stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the soft light behind him. He looked like he had just come out of a long meeting or a sleepless night, or both. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, the top button undone, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Sharp jawline graying at the temples. His eyes were dark, tired, and deeply guarded. He said nothing at first, just scanned her quickly, uniform badge, the umbrella dripping at her feet. Then, "You're from the cleaning service." Laura hesitated, startled by his directness. Yes, I'm Rachel. He didn't question it. His eyes flicked to the badge. You're late, sorry, she mumbled, acutely aware of her damp hair and wrinkled uniform. He stepped aside. Just the first floor. Living room and library. No need to go upstairs. She nodded quickly and stepped past him. The door closed behind her with a quiet thud. Inside, the space was breathtaking and yet strangely cold. Polished floors crowned molding art she could never afford to study, let alone hang on her walls. But no flowers, no signs of life, no warmth. It felt more like a showroom than a home. A woman appeared from what appeared to be a home office, tall and elegant, in a tailored gray suit despite the late hour. Her dark hair was pulled into a severe bun, her expression calculating as she assessed Laura. David, the cleaning service, finally sent someone. Her voice was smooth, but carried an edge of disapproval. The man, David nodded curtly. Yes, Victoria, you can head home now. I'll handle it from here. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly as she looked Laura up and down. Are you sure I could stay and make sure she knows where everything is? That won't be necessary, David replied, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes as she collected her designer bag from a side table. Very well, I've left the quarterly reports on your desk for review. She paused beside Laura. The cleaning supplies are in the pantry. Don't miss the corners. With that, she strode out, leaving behind a trace of expensive perfume and palpable tension. Laura stood awkwardly, clutching her bag, feeling distinctly out of place. David seemed to have already forgotten her presence, turning toward what looked like his study. The supplies are where, she said. Just do what you can. Laura walked softly into the living room and set down her cleaning bag. She glanced once toward the hallway, then began wiping down surfaces with careful, practiced motions. Her nerves were still buzzing. She was halfway through dusting the coffee table when she heard it, a small shuffle behind her like bare feet on tile. She turned. A boy stood at the edge of the room, maybe 4 years old, pale, with soft brown hair and big gray eyes that seemed too serious for someone his age. He clutched a stuffed elephant in one hand, the other hanging limply at his side. Laura froze, then offered a soft smile. Hi there. He didn't answer, just tilted his head slightly. I'm just here to clean a little. What's your name? Still nothing. He blinked up at her, curious but quiet. She glanced at the tissues in her apron pocket, then reached in and pulled one out. With a few swift folds, she shaped it into a small paper plane. You want to see something cool? She whispered. The boy's eyes followed her hand as she gently tossed the plane toward him. It fluttered awkwardly, landed near his feet. He bent to pick it up and smiled just slightly, a flicker of amusement. Laura's heart melted. Behind her a voice spoke. He never smiles for strangers. She turned sharply. David stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely over his chest. He wasn't scowling, but he wasn't smiling either. His gaze stayed fixed on his son, not Laura. I didn't mean to bother him, she said quickly. You didn't. His voice was low even. He's just cautious. That's all. The little boy looked up at his father, then back at Laura, still holding the paper plane. I'll finish up and go, she set her hands back to wiping. But David did not leave the room. He stayed there a moment longer, watching the woman with the mop and the nervous smile who had somehow made his son laugh. And for the first time in a very long time, he did not feel completely alone. I'm making pasta, he said abruptly. It's nothing fancy. Just spaghetti. You're welcome to join us when you're done. Laura blinked in surprise. I really shouldn't. It's just spaghetti, David said, already turning away. My chef's off tonight. Theo has already invited you. Theo gave a small, solemn nod, clutching the paper plane tighter. The dining room was long and elegant, but the food was modest. 3 plates, simple spaghetti, and a bowl of salad. Theo climbed into his booster seat. David gestured to the chair beside him. Laura sat cautiously. Do you always have your cleaners join you for dinner? The question slipped out before she could stop it. David didn't look up from serving Theo a small portion. Only the ones who fold paper airplanes. She laughed despite herself, the tension easing slightly. Theo ate more than she expected, even leaning toward her at one point. You eat slow, he whispered, his voice so quiet she almost missed it. David looked up surprised. He doesn't usually talk to anyone. Laura smiled gently. I must have special spaghetti energy. David's eyes lingered on her face, something shifting in his expression. Have you worked in cleaning long? Laura stiffened the lie, hovering uncomfortably. Not exactly. I've just helped family. So this isn't your main job. No, I'm finishing school. What are you studying? She hesitated, calculating how much truth she could afford. Health sciences. He nodded slowly, silent, but studying her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. After dinner, Laura cleared plates, ignoring David's half-hearted protest. She was reaching for her coat when a small hand tugged at her uniform. Theo stood there, his eyes wide and imploring. "Can you read me a story?" he asked, his voice small but clear. Laura blinked. "Me." He nodded, already pulling her toward the stairs. She looked back at David, uncertain. "If it's okay, just one." His arms were crossed, but he gave a short nod. "Second room on the left." Theo's room was neat and sparsely decorated. Pale blue walls, books lined on a low shelf. A nightlight glowed softly. Laura helped him onto the bed and picked a story about a bear who couldn't sleep. As she read, Theo's head gradually tilted until it rested against her arm, his breathing evening out. She whispered the last line and closed the book. When she turned, David was at the doorway, silent, watching. She rose slowly, brushing Theo's hair back before stepping into the hall. "Thank you," David said quietly. "For what?" He looked toward the bed. "For giving him that. He hasn't let anyone in there since." He stopped, voice fading. Laura didn't ask. She didn't need to. "I should go," she whispered. He followed her downstairs. At the door, she reached for the knob, but he stepped ahead, lifting an umbrella. Without a word, he held it above her as they stepped into the rain. "Hard to find someone who cleans and reads bedtime stories," he murmured. She glanced up, startled by the softness in his voice. "Thank you for today," he added. She could only nod. As she walked toward the gate, he stood watching until she vanished into the night. Later, he paused outside Theo's door. His son was fast asleep, arms around his elephant, the faintest smile on his face. David leaned against the frame, whispering into the quiet. "You smiled for her, buddy. Something I haven't seen you do in a very long time." The next morning, David Whitmore sat at the edge of his desk, phone to his ear. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of his home office, but he barely registered it. "I want the same woman back," he said firmly. "Rachel, the one from last night. Send her again." There was a pause on the other end. "Mr. Whitmore, I'll need to confirm her schedule." "Then confirm it," he said curtly, then ended the call. He leaned back, silent for a moment. Something had shifted in his house last night. For the first time in a long time, it had felt less like a museum and more like a home. Theo had smiled, laughed even, and David would not let that slip away. Back in Queens, Rachel was still resting when Laura came home from her exam. Her ankle was elevated, wrapped in gauze. She looked pale, but managed a small smile. "They called," Rachel murmured. "The client wants me again." Laura raised a brow. "And I told them yes." Rachel's voice was calm. "Then I gave them your number instead." Laura blinked. "Rachel, you didn't." She held Laura's gaze. "I can't go, Laura. You saw my ankle, but he asked for me, which means he asked for you." Before Rachel could argue further, Laura's phone rang. Unknown number. She stared at the screen, then answered. Rachel. The voice was unmistakable. Palm deep, unmistakably David Whitmore. Laura's pulse spiked. "Yes, this is Rachel. I'd like you to return today. I'll arrange for transportation. You'll be compensated." I don't think You can," he interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "Please, I insist." Laura hesitated. She thought of Theo's small hand gripping hers, his shy laugh, the paper airplane sailing across the room. "I'll come," she said softly. That afternoon, a black car waited for her at campus. The driver held the door. Laura slipped inside, balancing her books on her lap. She reminded herself, just for a few days, nothing more. At the estate, David greeted her at the door. This time he wore a crisp suit. He looked more composed, but the tiredness in his eyes was still there. "You're here," he said quietly, then added, "Good. Think of it less as cleaning, more as helping with my son. He responds to you." Laura crossed her arms. "Only after classes, and no extra pay. I'm not doing this for the money." David nodded, almost smiling. "As you wish." The days took on a quiet rhythm. Laura arrived each afternoon, changed into her uniform, and moved through the house with quiet familiarity. On the nights when the kitchen staff was off, she cooked simple meals: grilled cheese, tomato soup, pasta with soft-boiled eggs. She folded Theo's tiny socks, cleaned his playroom, and helped him arrange his picture books. She answered every question he asked, even the ones that came in whispers at bedtime. Theo began to trail after her everywhere. He waited for her by the stairs, held her hand when they walked through the garden, and laughed when she built towers out of cereal boxes and old Lego bricks. David saw it all, sometimes from the study window, sometimes from the doorway, silent and still. He watched as Laura dusted Theo's room and uncovered an old photo frame wedged between storybooks. She wiped it clean and placed it on his desk, a photo of a woman with warm eyes cradling a baby. Theo's mother. Another evening, Laura found a threadbare toy elephant in a box labeled Donate. She did not say a word, just brushed it off, fluffed it up, and set it gently on Theo's pillow. That night, Theo held the toy tightly as he drifted to sleep, the photo frame watching over him from the desk. Laura never mentioned either gesture, but David noticed, and as the days passed, something began to loosen in him, a weight he had not known how to name. He no longer dreaded walking through the door each evening. Now when he came home, there was light, a soft voice reading from a children's book, laughter, warmth. He would stop at the threshold of the living room, hand on his loosened tie, and listen. And though he never said it aloud, he knew this house was no longer silent. It was starting to feel like home again. Nights in the Whitmore house had always been the hardest. The silence settled thick, the shadows too deep. Theo, small and watchful, had feared the dark since the day his mother stopped coming through the door. Most nights he woke crying, clinging to his stuffed elephant, whispering her name. Laura noticed. One evening, instead of a quick bedtime story, she brought out paper markers and scissors. Sitting on the floor beside his bed, she began cutting shapes, stars, moons, constellations, and taped them across the pale blue walls, building a glowing sky. "What's that one?" Theo asked, pointing. "That's Orion," she whispered. "He's strong. He watches over sleepers." "And that one," Laura smiled. "That's Lyra. They say her light carries music from heaven." Theo blinked. "From Mom?" Laura paused, then nodded. "Yes, like a lullaby she's sending down, so you never have to be afraid again." Theo smiled, small but real. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "I will." Later that night, David returned home, his shoulders heavy. As he passed Theo's room, he heard voices and pushed the door open slightly. Laura sat beside his son, her arm gently around him, pointing at the constellations on the wall. Theo was whispering the names after her, a quiet awe in his voice. He was smiling. David stood in the hallway, unmoving. Something in his chest ached. Something unfamiliar. The next few days became a rhythm. Laura arrived after class and the house was no longer silent. She and Theo made pancakes on Saturday morning. They read books sprawled on the rug. They filled quiet afternoons with crayons, towers of blocks, and laughter. David watched from a distance. He told himself it was for Theo, but he lingered longer than he meant to. Then came another rainy night. Laura arrived, soaked, her umbrella destroyed by the wind. She waved it off, smiling. But at dinner, her face was pale, her hands trembling. "You're sick," David said. "I'm fine," she murmured, swaying slightly. He caught her elbow. "Enough, go lie down." Theo looked up, worried. "Get your elephant," David told him gently. "We'll help her." He guided Laura to the guest room. Her skin burned with fever. She mumbled about needing to study, but he hushed her. "You're staying in bed. That's final." She nodded weakly and sank into the pillows. David went to the kitchen, something he had not done in years. He made broth, returned with a steaming bowl and a cool cloth. As he sat beside her and pressed the cloth to her forehead, she stirred. "Dad," she whispered, eyes still closed. He froze. "I saw him," she murmured. "In my dream. I was 12 when he died." David swallowed. "She looked so young, so vulnerable. If I were family to you, I'd be proud." She drifted back into sleep. Later that night, Theo crept into the room, his elephant in hand. David bent low. "She's resting. She'll feel better tomorrow." Theo whispered. "Can we keep her?" David could not answer. But as he looked at the girl sleeping in his home, her quiet presence making the air feel warm again, he knew something had changed. Something ordinary, something magical. The Whitmore estate was unusually quiet that morning. Laura hummed softly as she dusted the shelves in the library, her mind already drifting toward the notes she would need to review later for her exam. Theo sat on the rug at her feet, carefully coloring in the pages of his book, occasionally glancing up at her as though making sure she wouldn't disappear. Victoria Blackwood stood in the doorway, watching them with narrowed eyes. Her dark suit was impeccable, her posture rigid with disapproval. Laura hadn't noticed her until Theo looked up and frowned. "Where's Daddy?" he asked, ignoring Victoria completely. Victoria's smile was tight. "He's in a meeting, Theo. I came to check on things." Her gaze shifted to Laura, cold and assessing. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Victoria Blackwood, David's executive assistant and close friend." The emphasis on close was unmistakable. Laura nodded politely. "Rachel Martinez. I'm helping with cleaning and babysitting," apparently, Victoria cut in. "How convenient for everyone." Theo stood up, moving closer to Laura. He took her hand, a small act of allegiance that didn't go unnoticed. Victoria's eyes flashed. "David mentioned you're a student. What are you studying again?" The question was casual but loaded. Laura felt the trap but couldn't avoid it. "Health sciences," she said carefully. Victoria's smile grew sharper. "Fascinating. David tells me everything you know. We've known each other for years, since before Elizabeth." The mention of Theo's mother hung in the air. Theo's grip on Laura's hand tightened. Laura felt a surge of protectiveness. "Theo, sweetie, why don't you go upstairs and get your book about stars? We can read it after I finish dusting." The little boy hesitated, glancing between them, then nodded and scampered off. Once he was out of earshot, Victoria's facade dropped completely. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it won't work," she said, voice low and dangerous. "David may be temporarily charmed by your little act with Theo, but he's not a fool. Men like David don't end up with cleaning staff." Laura straightened. "Is there something specific you needed, Ms. Blackwood? I have work to finish." Victoria laughed softly. "You think you're the first pretty young thing to try working her way into David's life through his son, through his grief." The accusation stung all the more because it touched on Laura's own fears. Was that what she was doing? Taking advantage of their vulnerability? "I'm just doing my job," Laura said firmly. "Theo needs someone, and I'm good with children." Victoria stepped closer. "I've spent 2 years by David's side, supporting him, guiding him, waiting for him to be ready. I won't let some nobody with a cleaning cart and a few paper tricks ruin that." The threat was unmistakable. Before Laura could respond, David's voice came from the hallway. "Victoria, I thought you had the board meeting to prepare for." Victoria turned, her expression instantly softening. "Just checking in as you asked. Everything seems, well, unconventional." David's eyes moved from Victoria to Laura, sensing the tension. "Is Theo okay?" "He went upstairs to get a book," Laura explained. "We're going to read after I finish here." David nodded, satisfied. "Victoria, I need those contract revisions before lunch." It was a dismissal, and Victoria knew it. She collected her bag, her movements precise and controlled. "Of course, David. I'll see myself out. We'll talk later." Her gaze lingered on Laura for a moment longer, a silent warning before she strode out. The air seemed to lighten as soon as she was gone. "Sorry about that," David said quietly. "Victoria can be protective." Laura nodded, unsure what to say. The word protective seemed inadequate for the territorial display she'd just witnessed. "She's been with the company a long time," David continued. "Since before, everything changed. She's valuable, but sometimes forgets her boundaries." He seemed to be explaining something to himself as much as to Laura. Before either could say more, Theo came bounding down the stairs, starbook in hand, the moment with Victoria already forgotten. That night, after Theo was asleep, Laura found David in his study. Papers were spread across his desk, but he wasn't looking at them. Instead, he stared out the window into the darkness of the garden. She hesitated at the door, not wanting to intrude. "I should go. It's getting late." He turned, seeming unsurprised to find her there. "You're good with him. Better than anyone has been since Elizabeth died." The compliment warmed her, but also sharpened her guilt. "I just try to listen to him. He's smarter than people realize." David nodded. "I know. I just haven't known how to reach him. I've been afraid of saying the wrong thing, of making it worse somehow." The admission cost him something. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes. Laura took a step into the room. "Sometimes there are no right words. Just being there is enough." "Is it?" He looked at her directly. "Because I've been here physically, but I don't think I've been present. Not the way you are with him. It's different," Laura said softly. "I'm not carrying the same grief you are." David's gaze was steady, assessing. "Who are you, Rachel Martinez?" "Really?" The question caught her off guard. Her heart raced. "I told you, I'm a student. I clean to pay for school." That's what you do, David corrected, not who you are. Laura swallowed hard. The line between truth and deception was blurring, making it hard to breathe. I'm someone who knows what it's like to lose a parent young. Someone who understands that grief doesn't follow a timetable. David studied her for a long moment. Then something in his expression softened. That explains a lot. He stood moving closer and Laura fought the urge to step back. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. I should really go, she whispered. David nodded but didn't move away. Same time tomorrow. It was their routine question now, the one he asked every night before she left. Usually she just nodded. Tonight, though, she hesitated. Is that what you want? The question hung between them, loaded with meaning beyond the simple words. David's eyes darkened. Yes, he said finally. That's what I want. Laura nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. Rachel. He rarely used her name, her false name, and it sent a pang of guilt through her. Thank you for everything. She didn't turn back, afraid of what he might see in her face. You're welcome, she managed, and then she was gone, hurrying down the hallway as if she could outrun the complicated feelings taking root in her heart. At home, she found Rachel awake despite the late-hour textbooks spread around her on the couch. Her sister looked up, concern creasing her brow. It's getting complicated, isn't it? She asked softly. Laura sank down beside her, exhausted. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Rach. I went there to help you keep a child. Now I don't even know what I am to them. Rachel touched her arm gently. From what you've told me, you're becoming family. The words sent a jolt through Laura. That's the problem. I'm lying to them. Every day, every moment. David asks who I really am and I can't tell him. So tell him, Rachel suggested. Tell him the truth, Laura laughed bitterly, that I've been deceiving him for weeks, that I pretended to be you to help my sister keep a job, but then stayed because you care about them, Rachel finished for her, and they care about you. Laura couldn't deny it. That's what makes it worse. I'm building something real on a foundation of lies. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, maybe it's time to choose your medical career or this new life you're creating with them, because you can't keep doing both, not like this. The truth of it hit Laura hard. She was falling behind in her studies, exhausted from the double life. Yet the thought of walking away from Theo, from David, from the warmth she'd found in that once cold house, it felt impossible. I need to end it, she said finally, the words painful in her throat. Before someone gets hurt, even worse. Even as she said it, though, she knew it wouldn't be that simple. The Whitmores had woven themselves into her heart thread by delicate thread. Cutting those connections would leave scars she wasn't sure would ever heal. The next afternoon, Laura arrived at the Whitmore estate to find an unfamiliar car in the driveway. As she approached the front door, it opened to reveal a distinguished older man in an expensive suit shaking hands with David. We'll expect those documents by Friday then, Mr. Whitmore, the man was saying. The board is particularly interested in your expansion plans. David nodded, professional and composed. You'll have everything you need, Senator. The man noticed Laura hovering at the bottom of the steps and raised an eyebrow. David followed his gaze. Ah, Rachel, he said, his tone carefully neutral. This is Senator Hargrove, head of our Hospital Foundation Board. Senator, this is Rachel Martinez. She helps with Theo. The senator's assessment was swift and dismissive. A pleasure, I'm sure. He turned back to David. Friday, then? After he left, David's professional mask slipped, revealing exhaustion underneath. Sorry about that. Board politics. Necessary evil. Laura followed him inside. Everything okay? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of stress. Just the usual power plays. The foundation is expanding its children's cancer wing, Elizabeth's project originally. I'm trying to make sure it happens the way she would have wanted. The mention of Elizabeth was still rare, each one a small gift of trust. Laura treaded carefully. That sounds like important work. It is. David's voice softened. She was diagnosed too late for treatment to help, but she wanted to make sure other families had better options. More time. The unspoken grief hung in the air between them. Laura reached out, touching his arm lightly. I'm sure she'd be proud of what you're doing. David looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. His expression was unreadable. Would she? I'm not so sure. I've been so focused on preserving what we had that I haven't been able to move forward. Not until recently. The implication was clear. Laura felt heat rise to her cheeks and withdrew her hand. "Where's Theo?" she asked, changing the subject. "Napping. He was up early, excited about something he wants to show you." "That's sweet," Laura smiled, grateful for the shift in focus. "I'll check on him when he wakes up." David nodded but made no move to return to his office. Instead, he watched her as she removed her coat and prepared to begin her usual routine. "You know," he said after a moment, "you don't have to clean today. You could just be here. With Theo. With us." The offer caught her off guard. "But I'm supposed to be—" "I know what you're supposed to be," David interrupted gently, "but we both know that's not why you're here anymore." The truth of it hung between them, undeniable. Laura hesitated, torn between maintaining the pretense and acknowledging what they both knew, that her role in this house had evolved into something far beyond cleaning. Before she could respond, the sound of small feet on the stairs broke the moment. Theo appeared, hair mussed from his nap, eyes bright with excitement. "Laura, you're here," he exclaimed, running to her. "I made something for you." He thrust a paper into her hands, a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. The smallest one in the middle was clearly Theo. The taller figures on either side were labeled Daddy and Laura in wobbly letters. Laura's heart clenched. Theo had used her real name, not Rachel, but at Laura. She glanced up at David, panic fluttering in her chest. He frowned, slightly confused. "Laura," Theo nodded enthusiastically. "That's her secret name. For stars and stories." "Right." He looked up at her, complete trust in his eyes. Laura felt the room tilt slightly. Her deception was unraveling thread by thread, and she wasn't ready. David's expression shifted from confusion to something harder, more guarded. "Secret name," Laura swallowed hard. It's a game we play," she managed, her voice thin, "for bedtime stories." Theo nodded, oblivious to the tension. "She's Laura at night for stars, Rachel for cleaning." David's eyes never left her face, searching for truth, finding something else entirely. "I see," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Thea, why don't you go set up your train set? I need to talk to Rachel for a minute." The little boy looked between them, sensing something wrong, but unable to name it. "Kay," he agreed reluctantly, taking his drawing back from Laura's trembling hands. He headed toward the playroom, glancing back once before disappearing around the corner. When they were alone, David's demeanor changed completely. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "And don't tell me you're Rachel Martinez, because I'm starting to think that's not true." Laura felt cornered, trapped by her own lies. "I can explain," she began, but the words dried up in her throat. David's laugh was bitter, humorless. "That's what people say when they can't explain. When they've been caught. It's not what you think," Laura insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "I never meant to deceive you, not beyond that first night." "But you did." David said, his voice hardening. "Every day since, was anything real? Or was it all just some elaborate game?" The hurt in his eyes cut deeper than anger would have. Laura reached for him instinctively, but he stepped back. "David, please, let me explain." He looked at her, really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Go ahead. Explain why my son calls you by a different name. Why you've been lying to us from the beginning." The moment had come, the one she'd been dreading and postponing. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. Laura took a deep breath. "My name is Laura Martinez. Rachel is my sister. She works for the cleaning service. She fell and injured her ankle the night she was supposed to start here. She asked me to cover for her just that once. But then you asked for her to come back, and she couldn't, and I let it continue." David finished for her, his voice hollow. "Because Theo responded to you." Laura nodded, tears threatening. "I never meant to deceive you, not beyond that first night. But then Theo asked me to read to him, and you seemed so grateful, and it just snowballed." David was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but she could hear the hurt beneath it. "So everything, the stars, the stories, all of it was based on a lie." No, Laura's response was immediate and fierce. "The only lie was my name. Everything else, how I feel about Theo, how I—" She stopped herself, but it was too late. "How you what?" David's eyes held hers, demanding the truth. "How I've come to care about you both," she finished softly. "That part is real, more real than anything." He stared at her conflict, evident in every line of his face. Just then, Theo's voice came from the doorway. "Are you mad at Laura, Daddy?" They both turned startled. The little boy stood watching them, his lower lip trembling slightly. David's expression softened. "No, buddy. We're just talking." Theo looked unconvinced. "You look mad." David sighed, beckoning his son closer. "Sometimes adults have complicated feelings. It doesn't mean anyone's bad or wrong. But Laura's not bad." Theo insisted, moving to her side and taking her hand. "She makes the stars and scares away the bad dreams." David's jaw tightened. "She's not who she said she was, Theo. She wasn't honest with us." Theo considered this, his face serious beyond his years. "But she makes you smile again, like in the pictures with Mommy." The simple observation landed like a physical blow. David looked away, emotion flickering across his face too quickly to read. Laura knelt to Theo's level, her heart breaking. "Theo, sweetie, I did something wrong. I didn't tell the truth about my name. Your dad has every right to be upset, but you'll still come back." Theo's voice was small, vulnerable. For stars, Laura looked up at David, seeking permission. Guidance, forgiveness, she wasn't sure which. His expression was unreadable. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly. "That's for your dad to decide." David watched them, the woman who had brought light back into his home and his son, who had begun to heal because of her. His anger warred with something else, something deeper and more complex. "We need time," he said finally, "all of us, to figure out what happens next." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was space, breathing room in which truth might be examined and decisions made. Laura nodded, understanding. "I should go." For now, David agreed, his voice softer than she expected. "But this conversation isn't over." As she collected her things, Theo watched with worried eyes. Laura knelt to hug him goodbye, whispering promises that the stars would still watch over him, that the dreams would still stay away. At the door, David stopped her with a light touch on her arm. "No more lies, Laura. Not between us, not ever again." It wasn't a request, but a condition. One she understood completely. "No more lies," she agreed. Then, unable to help herself, "My name is Laura Martinez. I'm a medical student in my final year. And I think I'm falling for both of you more than I ever meant to." The admission hung between them, raw and vulnerable. David's expression softened fractionally. "Good night, Laura," he said, her real name sounding different in his voice, weighted with meaning, with possibility. As she walked away from the house, Laura felt something shift. The deception had been exposed, the foundation cracked. But perhaps, just perhaps, something stronger could be built in its place. Something founded on truth rather than convenience. On choice rather than circumstance. The rain began again as she reached the gate, gentle this time, washing away the old and making space for whatever might come next. Laura stood at the bus stop the next morning, medical textbook open in her hands, but the words might as well have been written in a foreign language. Her mind kept returning to the Whitmore mansion, to David's face when he learned her real name, to Theo's innocent confusion. The revelation had gone both better and worse than she'd feared. No shouting, no immediate dismissal, but the hurt in David's eyes had been unmistakable. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Any news?" Laura typed back. "Not yet. I'm giving him space." Space. Such a simple word for the yawning chasm that had opened between them. She closed her textbook as the bus approached, wondering if she'd ever return to the mansion that had begun to feel more like home than her tiny Queens apartment. Marshall's voice cut through her thoughts during morning rounds. "Ms. Martinez, your differential diagnosis for the patient in bed 3. Laura scrambled to focus, acutely aware of her classmates' eyes on her. Given the elevated white count and the joint pain, I'd consider rheumatoid arthritis, but the rash distribution suggests." She fumbled through her answer, knowing it lacked her usual precision. Dr. Marshall's frown deepened. "See me after rounds, Ms. Martinez." The words hung over her for the next hour. When the group dispersed, Dr. Marshall gestured her into an empty consultation room. "Laura, what's happening? You were my most promising student, and now you're barely keeping up." She stared at her hands. "I'm sorry, Dr. Marshall. I've had some personal complications." "Medicine doesn't allow for personal complications. Laura, patients need you present, focused. Whatever's dividing your attention, resolve it or set it aside." His words, though harsh, carried genuine concern. Laura nodded, throat tight. "I understand." It won't happen again. Good. His expression softened slightly. The hospital director mentioned your application for the pediatric residency program. Outstanding credentials, but they're watching your performance now. Don't throw away everything you've worked for. Laura left the hospital in a daze, the weight of his warnings settling heavily on her shoulders. Everything she'd worked for, years of sacrifice, night shifts, student loans. Could she really risk it all for a connection built on deception? Her phone buzzed again. This time the message made her heart skip. Please come by the house this evening. We need to talk. David, know if you can or when you're free. Just a simple request that felt more like a summons. Laura took a deep breath, typing back a single word. Okay. The Whitmore estate looked different as her cab approached that evening. Neither as intimidating as on her first visit, nor as welcoming as it had become in recent weeks. It simply waited its windows, glowing softly in the gathering dusk, revealing nothing of what might happen inside. Victoria's sleek car was parked in the circular drive. Laura's stomach tightened. Of course David would have told his executive assistant about her deception. Victoria had been suspicious from the beginning, and now she'd been proven right. Laura paid the driver and approached the front door, each step heavier than the last. Before she could knock, it swung open to reveal Victoria, her smile sharp as a knife's edge. Laura, how nice to finally meet the real you. The emphasis on real carried all the accusation Laura had expected. She steeled herself. Is David here? In his study. Victoria stepped aside, making no move to leave. He's been expecting you. Laura moved past her into the foyer, feeling Victoria's eyes burning into her back. The house seemed unnaturally quiet. Where's Theo Swayam? With his nanny. David thought it best to keep him occupied during your discussion. Of course, David wouldn't want Theo present for whatever came next. Smart, but the knowledge stung nonetheless. The study door was ajar. Laura knocked softly, hearing David's deep voice, "Come in." He sat behind his desk, papers arranged neatly before him, as if this were a business meeting rather than a conversation that might shatter the fragile connection they'd built. His face was composed, unreadable. Thank you for coming, Laura. Her real name in his voice sent a shiver through her. She remained standing, unsure of her place in this room, in this house, in his life. Victoria will be joining us, he added, and Laura's heart sank. So this was to be formal then, a termination with Victoria as witness. Victoria glided in, taking a seat in one of the leather chairs positioned in front of David's desk. She gestured to the other, and please sit. Laura sat back straight, hands clasped in her lap to hide their trembling. Before anything else, I want to apologize again. What I did was wrong, and Let's be clear about what exactly you did wrong, Victoria interrupted. You assumed a false identity to gain access to a private home. You built a relationship with a vulnerable child under false pretenses. Some might consider that criminal. Victoria, David's voice held a warning note. We agreed I would lead this conversation. Victoria's lips thinned, but she nodded, sitting back. David turned his attention to Laura. I've had time to think about everything, about why you did what you did, and about my own role in allowing it to continue. Laura frowned. Your role, David, this was my deception, not yours. Perhaps, but I sensed something wasn't quite right from the beginning. The way you handled yourself, your knowledge, your interactions with Theo, none of it fit the profile of someone whose primary job was cleaning houses. His gaze was steady, evaluating. Yet I chose not to question it because Theo was responding to you, because the house felt alive again. I was complicit. The admission surprised her. Victoria shifted impatiently in her chair. David, we discussed this. You can't blame yourself for being deceived. I'm not blaming myself. I'm acknowledging reality. David leaned forward, elbows on his desk. Laura, I've confirmed with the cleaning service that Rachel Martinez is indeed your sister, currently on medical leave with an ankle injury. I've also verified that you're a medical student in your final year at Columbia with an impressive academic record until recently. Laura swallowed hard. You investigated me. Of course he did, Victoria interjected. Did you expect him to simply take your word after discovering you'd lied about your very identity? David held up a hand, silencing Victoria. I needed to understand who you really are. What I found is someone who stepped in to help her sister, then got caught in a situation that spiraled beyond her control. Someone who, despite the deception, genuinely cared for my son, who brought light back into a house that had been dark for too long. Hope flickered in Laura's chest, quickly tempered by caution. This wasn't sounding like a termination, but David's expression remained guarded. However, he continued, that doesn't change the fundamental breach of trust. Trust is everything to me, Laura. After Elizabeth died, it became even more precious and more rare. I understand, Laura said softly, and I would never blame you for not being able to trust me again. Victoria leaned forward. David, we discussed the legal implications. I've drawn up the non-disclosure agreement. That won't be necessary. David cut her off. Victoria stared at him. But we agreed. No, you suggested and I listened. But I've made my decision. David's voice was firm, his gaze never leaving Laura's face. I'm not interested in legal remedies or formal agreements. Victoria's expression hardened. You can't be serious. After everything she's done, what has she done exactly? David asked quietly. Helped my son speak again, brought warmth back into my home, made me remember what it feels like to look forward to coming home at night. Laura's breath caught in her throat. Victoria stood abruptly. You're making a mistake. She manipulated you, used your son to get close to you. That's not true, Laura protested. I never enough. David's voice cut through their exchange. Victoria, thank you for your concern, but this is my decision to make. Victoria gathered her bag, her movements stiff with anger. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you when this ends badly. She strode to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. The board meeting tomorrow, David, 9 sharp. Don't let your personal situation interfere with your responsibilities. The door closed behind her with a decisive click. Silence fell in the study heavier now that they were alone. David sighed, running a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of stress that Laura had come to recognize. I apologize for that. Victoria is protective. She cares about you, Grim, Laura acknowledged, surprised by her own generosity toward the woman who clearly despised her. Yes, though not in the way she might wish. David's gaze was direct, leaving no doubt about his meaning. She's been hoping for more than a professional relationship for some time. Laura shifted uncomfortably. I should go. I've caused enough disruption already. Is that what you want, to go? David's question was soft but pointed. Laura hesitated, caught between honesty and self-preservation. What I want doesn't matter. I lied to you, broke your trust. And I have responsibilities, my medical program, my future. You didn't answer my question. David stood, moving around the desk to lean against its edge, closer to her now. Do you want to go, Laura? She looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. No, she whispered, but I don't see how I can stay. What if I asked you to? The question hung between them, breathtaking in its simplicity and its implications. Laura's heart thundered in her chest. David, A small voice from the doorway interrupted them. Laura, you came back. Theo stood there in pajamas, his stuffed elephant clutched to his chest, face bright with joy. Before either adult could respond, he launched himself across the room and into Laura's arms. She caught him automatically, his small body warm against hers. Hey, buddy, she said softly, her eyes meeting David's over Theo's head. I knew you'd come back, Theo declared, pulling back to look at her face. I told Daddy you would. David moved closer, his expression softening as he watched them. Theo, you're supposed to be in bed. Mrs. Winters is looking for you. I heard Laura's voice, Theo explained simply, as if that justified everything. Are you staying? Can we do stars again? The question pierced Laura's heart. She looked to David, unsure how to respond. He crouched beside them, placing a gentle hand on Theo's shoulder. Laura and I are still talking about some grown-up things, buddy, but I promise you'll see her again. Okay. Theo considered this, then nodded solemnly. Promise, David confirmed, and Laura felt the weight of that word, its significance in this household of broken trust and mending hearts. Mrs. Winters, a gray-haired woman in a cardigan, appeared in the doorway. There you are, young man. I've been looking everywhere. Theo reluctantly extricated himself from Laura's embrace. Good night, Laura. Good night, Daddy. Sweet dreams, sweetheart, Laura whispered as he padded back to his nanny, turning once to wave before disappearing down the hallway. Alone again, the air between them seemed charged with all they hadn't yet said. David returned to his position leaning against the desk. "He's missed you," he said simply. "We both have." Laura stood needing to move to think clearly without his proximity clouding her judgment. "David, this is impossible. I can't just pretend the deception never happened, and you can't either not, really. I'm not suggesting we pretend anything. I'm suggesting we move forward with the truth." He straightened, taking a step toward her. "The truth is you made a mistake. The truth is also that you've become important to Theo and to me." Laura shook her head, even as his words sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Doctor, Marshall warned me today that I'm risking my medical career. Years of work sacrifice everything I've been building toward. And is that a price you are willing to pay?" "I don't know," she admitted. "That's what terrifies me. A month ago, the answer would have been simple. Now," she gestured helplessly, "I don't recognize myself anymore. The Laura I've always been wouldn't risk everything for." "For what?" David pressed when she faltered. "For feelings that might not survive the real world," she finished quietly. "This connection we have, it's built in a bubble, David. A beautiful, fragile bubble where I'm just the woman who makes paper stars and reads bedtime stories. But that's not all of who I am. And you're not just Theo's grieving father. We're more complex than the roles we've been playing in each other's lives." David was silent for a long moment, considering her words. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "You're right. We've existed in a kind of suspended reality. You stepping into our lives through an unusual circumstance, me allowing it to continue because it was easier than facing certain truths." "Like what?" Laura asked. "Like the fact that I've been using Elizabeth's death as a shield against living." His admission was raw, honest in a way that caught her off guard. It was easier to be the grieving widower, the devoted father carrying on his wife's legacy, than to acknowledge that life continues, that I might want things for myself again. Laura's throat tightened with emotion. "And what do you want, David?" He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "I want to find out if what's growing between us is real. Not in a bubble, as you put it, but in the messy, complicated real world." "How?" she whispered. "Start over. Properly this time. No deception, no pretense." He held out his hand, formal and yet intimate. "Hello, I'm David Whitmore. Single father CEO, still figuring out how to live again. And you are..." Despite everything, Laura felt a smile tugging at her lips. She placed her hand in his. "Laura Martinez, medical student, devoted sister woman who makes paper stars and is terrified of where her heart is leading her." His fingers tightened around hers. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Laura Martinez." "Likewise, David Whitmore." For a moment they stood like that, hands clasped, the simple introduction somehow more intimate than any touch they'd shared before. Then David released her hand, stepping back slightly. "I have a proposal," he said. "Not a romantic one," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "A practical one." "I'm listening." "You mentioned your medical career is suffering. I'm guessing it's difficult to balance your studies with the time you've been spending here." Laura nodded, relieved at the shift to more practical matters. "Nearly impossible, honestly. I'm falling behind in clinical rotations. My board exam prep is nowhere near where it should be." "What if I could help with that?" David interrupted. "The foundation I mentioned, Elizabeth's project, it's partnered with Columbia Medical Center. We fund several research positions, fellowships, special programs for medical students interested in pediatric oncology." Laura frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "An official position, part-time clinical research assistant with flexible hours. It would look impressive on your residency applications, provide some income, and most importantly, give us a framework for continuing to see each other that doesn't involve deception or complications." "You want to give me a joint?" Laura wasn't sure whether to be touched or offended. David smiled slightly. "I want to remove one obstacle from the many we're facing. The foundation needs bright medical minds. You need career stability and flexibility. It seems like a reasonable solution." Laura considered his proposal. It was logical, thoughtful even, but something about it bothered her. "And what about us? Would I be your employee, David? Is that really a better foundation than the deception we're trying to move past?" His smile faded. "You'd be employed by the foundation, not by me personally. But you're right, it does create a different kind of complication." "I appreciate the thought," Laura said gently, but I think I need to fix my academic situation on my own. Otherwise, I'd just be trading one form of dependence for another. David nodded slowly. I understand. It was presumptuous of me. No, Laura corrected. It was kind, but not the right solution. They stood in silence for a moment, the practical realities of their situation settling between them. Finally, David spoke again. So where does that leave us? Laura took a deep breath. I think we need time. Real time in the real world. I need to focus on getting my medical career back on track. You need to be sure that what you feel for me isn't just gratitude for how I've helped Theo. And Theo, David asked softly, he's grown attached to you. The thought of Theo broke her heart all over again. I don't want to disappear from his life. That would only reinforce his fears of abandonment. But maybe we scale back. No more daily visits. Maybe once a week I come for dinner, or to read him a story, as Laura, not as Rachel, as a friend of the family, not as someone playing a role. David considered this. A fresh start, on honest terms. Exactly. He nodded slowly. It makes sense. Though I'll miss seeing you every day. The simple admission warmed her. I'll miss you too. Both of you. David moved closer again, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather light. Then it settled. We start over, take it slow, see where it leads. No pressure, no expectations. Laura nodded, trying to ignore the way her skin tingled where his fingers had brushed it. Agreed. For a moment they stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could catch the faint scent of his cologne. Then David stepped back, breaking the spell. It's late. Let me drive you home. The offer surprised her. You don't have to do that. I want to, he said simply. If we're starting fresh, let me do this one thing right. No more sending you off alone into the night. Laura smiled, touched by the gesture. Okay, thank you. The drive to Queens was quiet, comfortable in a way she hadn't expected. David asked about her medical studies, listening intently as she explained her interest in pediatrics. She inquired about his company, the foundation, learning more about the work that consumed so much of his life. By the time they reached her apartment building, the awkwardness of earlier had largely dissipated, replaced by a tentative new understanding. David parked but made no move to get out of the car. So dinner on Friday, you, me, and Theo. As a proper start to our friendship, Laura appreciated his careful choice of words. I'd like that. Good. He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Until Friday, then. Until Friday, she opened the car door, then paused. David, thank you for giving us another chance. His eyes met hers, warm and steady. Some things are worth taking chances on, Laura Martinez. She carried those words with her as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, feeling lighter than she had in weeks despite the challenges still ahead. Rachel was waiting up, her face anxious. Well, what happened? Laura set down her bag, a small smile playing at her lips. We're starting over, honestly this time. The days that followed took on a new rhythm. Laura threw herself into her studies with renewed focus, making up missed clinical hours, studying late into the night. Dr. Marshall noted the improvement with approving nods during rounds, and Laura felt herself slowly reclaiming the academic standing she'd worked so hard to achieve. Friday evening arrived with a flutter of nervous anticipation. Laura chose her outfit carefully, a simple blue dress, casual, but nicer than anything she'd worn to the Whitmore house before. This wasn't Rachel coming to clean or help with Theo. This was Laura visiting as herself for the first time. David answered the door, casual in jeans and a light sweater, an outfit she'd never seen him in before. The informality suited him, softening his usually imposing presence. Hi, she said, suddenly shy. Hi yourself, he replied, stepping back to let her in. You look beautiful. The compliment, direct and unguarded, brought warmth to her cheeks. Thank you. You look different. Good different. He smiled. No suits on Fridays. House rule. From the kitchen came the sound of small feet running. Then Theo appeared, face alight with excitement. Laura, Daddy said you're staying for pizza. She crouched to his level. That's right. Is that okay with you? He nodded enthusiastically. I helped make it. Daddy let me put on the cheese. Then it's going to be the best pizza ever, she assured him, accepting his outstretched hand as he pulled her toward the kitchen. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. They ate pizza at the kitchen island rather than in the formal dining room, Theo chattering about his week at preschool. David relaxed and attentive in a way Laura hadn't seen before. There was a naturalness to their interaction that had been missing during the weeks of deception, as if paradoxically honesty had freed them all to be more themselves. After dinner, Theo insisted on showing Laura the new constellations he and David had added to his ceiling, glow-in-the-dark stickers arranged in patterns they'd researched together. "See, that's the Big Dipper," Theo pointed proudly. "And that one's Cassio." "Cassio?" "Cassiopeia," David supplied from the doorway, watching them with a soft expression. "Right, the Queen Chair." Theo nodded. "Daddy got a real star book, and we're learning all the names." Laura felt a pang of something like pride mixed with wistfulness. They'd continued the tradition she'd started making it their own. "It looks amazing, Theo. You did a great job." After Theo's bedtime story, which he insisted Laura read, she and David settled in the living room with glasses of wine. The formality of their previous conversation in his study seemed far away now, replaced by a comfortable companionship. "He was so excited about you coming tonight," David said, watching her over the rim of his glass. "Kept asking how many sleeps until Laura visits." She smiled. "I missed him too. Both of you," she added softly. "How's school been?" "Better. I've caught up on most of the work I'd fallen behind on. Dr. Marshall seems less inclined to glare at me during rounds." David nodded, his expression turning more serious. "Laura, about what I suggested before the foundation position. I want you to know it wasn't an attempt to control the situation or create a power imbalance. It was just—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "It was you trying to solve a problem, find a practical solution. It's who you are." He looked surprised at her assessment. "Is that how you see me, the practical problem solver?" "Among other things," she smiled. "You're a caretaker, David. Of Theo, of your company, of Elizabeth's legacy. You fix things, protect people. It's one of the qualities I admire most about you." He seemed touched by her observation. "And what about you? How do you see yourself?" Laura considered the question. "I've always been the responsible one. After my dad died, my mom fell apart for a while. I had to step up, take care of Rachel, keep everything together. Then when we lost Mom, too, it was just us. I've spent so long being the person who handles everything that sometimes I forget there might be another way to be." "Is that why you became a doctor, to keep taking care of people?" "Partly," she acknowledged, "but also because my dad had a heart attack that could have been treated if we'd recognized the symptoms sooner. I wanted to be the person who could make that difference for someone else." David's eyes held hers, understanding dawning. "That's why you connected with Theo so quickly. You recognized his grief because you'd lived it yourself." Laura nodded, throat tight with emotion. "When I saw him that first night, so quiet, so serious, I remembered what it felt like. To be small and scared and not know how to express the hugeness of what you've lost." David set down his wine glass and moved closer to her on the couch. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for seeing him, for knowing what he needed when I couldn't figure it out." "You were grieving too," Laura reminded him gently. "It's hard to guide someone through a storm when you're caught in it yourself." He reached for her hand, his fingers warm as they entwined with hers. "How did you get so wise, Laura Martinez?" She smiled sadly. "Not wisdom, just experience." They sat like that for a while, hands linked, the silence comfortable between them. Finally, Laura glanced at the clock and sighed. "I should go. Early clinical rotation tomorrow." David nodded, though he made no move to release her hand. "Same time next week." "I'd like that." He walked her to the door, their hands still joined until the last possible moment. At the threshold, he hesitated, then leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. His lips brushed her cheek, gentle and warm. "Good night, Laura," he murmured, his breath soft against her skin. "Good night, David," she whispered back, her heart racing at the simple contact. The weeks that followed established a new pattern. Friday dinners at the Whitmore house became a fixed point in Laura's schedule, something she looked forward to do all week. Sometimes they were joined by Mrs. Winters, the kindly nanny who cared for Theo when David was at work. Occasionally, David would invite Laura to Sunday afternoon outings, the zoo, a children's museum, a picnic in the park. Always with Theo, always carefully casual friends spending time together, rather than anything that might be labeled dating. But something was growing between them, nonetheless evident in the lingering glances, the casual touches that became less casual with each passing week, the way David would call her late in the evening, sometimes just to talk about his day, or hear about hers. Laura thrived under the new arrangement. With her academic life back on track, she could enjoy her time with the Whitmores without guilt or divided attention. And David seemed different too. More relaxed, more present, laughing more easily than she'd ever seen during her time as Rachel. Only Victoria remained a shadow over their developing relationship. Laura encountered her occasionally at the house, always with the same cold assessment, the same barely concealed hostility. David assured Laura that Victoria's concerns were professional rather than personal. She worried about how his board might perceive his growing closeness to a young medical student, but Laura sensed it went deeper than that. One Friday in late October, Laura arrived at the Whitmore house to find David alone, his expression troubled. "Where's Theo?" she asked, immediately concerned. "With Mrs. Winters at his friend's birthday party. I hope you don't mind. I thought we should talk alone tonight." Something in his tone set off warning bells. "Is everything okay?" He guided her to the living room where a folder lay open on the coffee table. "Victoria brought these to my attention today. Apparently, she hired a private investigator to look into your background." Laura stared at him, shock and indignation warring within her. "She what, David? That's invasive, inappropriate, and completely unauthorized?" He finished, his voice tight with anger. "Believe me, I've made my feelings on the matter extremely clear." Laura approached the table cautiously. "What did she find?" "Nothing damaging," he assured her, quickly. "Your academic records, your family history, basic personal information, all things you've shared with me yourself. But there was one detail I thought you should know about." He handed her a photo, Laura entering a hospital white coat over her arm, deep in conversation with a handsome man in scrubs. They were walking close, smiling at each other with obvious familiarity. "Dr. James Sullivan," David said it quietly, "pediatric surgical fellow at Columbia. According to Victoria's sources, you two have been seen together frequently at the hospital." Laura stared at the photo, then back at David, understanding dawning. "You think?" "David, no. James is my study partner. We're in the same rotation group. That's all." Relief flashed across his face before he could hide it. "I shouldn't have doubted even for a moment. I'm sorry." She set the photo down. "Don't be. After everything that happened with my deception, you have every right to question." David moved closer, taking her hands in his. "No, I don't. Not anymore. These past weeks, getting to know the real you, I trust you, Laura. When Victoria showed me that photo, suggested there was someone else in your life." "There isn't," Laura said firmly. "There hasn't been anyone since I met you." The admission hung between them, more direct than anything they'd said before about their feelings. David's hands tightened on hers. "I fired Victoria today," he said quietly. Laura's eyes widened. "David, no. She's been with you for years. You can't fire her because of me, Pam." "I didn't fire her because of you. I fired her because she violated my trust and overstepped professional boundaries. The board has been concerned about her conduct for some time, her possessiveness, her interference in my personal decisions. This was the final straw." "She'll blame me," Laura said softly, "and she won't be entirely wrong." David shook his head. "This was coming for a long time. Victoria has been trying to control my life since Elizabeth died. At first, I was grateful for her efficiency, her willingness to handle everything. But lately, I've realized she wasn't helping me heal. She was keeping me frozen in place." Laura understood all too well. "Like I was doing with Rachel, taking care of everything, making decisions, thinking I knew what was best." "Exactly." David's thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "But you recognized it. You stepped back, let her make her own choices. Victoria couldn't do that for me." Laura considered his words. "What happens now?" "With your company, the foundation, I've promoted Michaela Chen to interim executive assistant. She's young but extremely capable. The board is supportive." He smiled slightly. "And I find I'm actually looking forward to the challenge of managing more aspects of my work myself again. It's time I fully stepped back into my life." The significance of his words wasn't lost on Laura. She searched his face, finding new resolve in the eyes that had once been so guarded. "David, what are we doing here, really?" He released her hands only to cup her face gently. "I think you know." "I need to hear you say it," she whispered. "I'm falling in love with you, Laura Martinez," he said simply. "Probably have been since you folded that first paper airplane for my son. I've been taking it slow, giving us both time to be sure, but I don't want to wait anymore. Life is too short and too precious to waste a single day pretending I don't know exactly what I want. Laura's heart soared at his words, even as caution tempered her joy. Are you sure there's so much complexity here? My career just starting your established life, Theo's needs. I'm sure, he interrupted gently. The question is, are you? Laura thought of everything that had brought them to this moment, the deception that started it all, the fragile trust they'd rebuilt, the careful friendship that had blossomed into something deeper. She thought of Theo's laughter, of David's quiet strength, of the way she felt more herself in this house than anywhere else. Yes, she whispered. I'm sure, Bow. David's smile transformed his face, years of grief and guardedness falling away in an instant. Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in. This time his lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home, like every paper star and bedtime story had been leading to this moment of perfect clarity. When they finally separated, Laura rested her forehead against his. What about Theo? She asked softly. How do we explain this to him? David smiled. I think he's been waiting for this longer than either of us. He asked me last week if you were going to be his new mommy. Laura's breath caught. What did you tell him? That grown-up relationships take time, but that you cared about him very much, and I cared about you, and we were figuring things out together. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Was that okay? She nodded, touched by his honesty with his son. Perfect. David pulled her closer, his arms strong and sure around her. No more pretending, no more holding back. Just us moving forward together, seeing where this leads. I'd like that, Laura whispered against his shoulder. Good, he murmured into her hair, because I'm not letting you go again. Outside, the October winds scattered leaves across the grounds of the Whitmore estate, nature's reminder that change, while sometimes frightening, brought its own kind of beauty. Inside, two people who had found each other through an unlikely deception held tight to the truth they discovered together, that sometimes the heart recognizes what it needs long before the mind can make sense of it. And somewhere upstairs, paper stars still glowed on a little boy's ceiling, promising that even in darkness, there is always light to be found, if you know where to look. The next morning, Laura woke to sunlight streaming through her apartment window and the lingering warmth of David's kisses. For the first time in months, she felt completely present, her mind and heart aligned, rather than pulling in opposite directions. Rachel was already in the kitchen, crutches propped against the counter, as she balanced on her healing ankle to make coffee. She turned at Laura's entrance, eyebrows rising at her sister's radiant expression. Well, someone had a good night. You didn't come home until late. Laura filled a mug with coffee, unable to suppress her smile. David and I, we decided to stop pretending we're just friends. Rachel grinned. About time. I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever. Her expression softened. I'm happy for you, Laura. Really. Thanks. Laura hesitated, then added, there's something else. David fired Victoria yesterday. Rachel frowned. His assistant. The one who hated you, Wiki. Laura explained about the private investigator, the photos, Victoria's increasingly inappropriate behavior. Rachel listened, her expression growing more concerned. Be careful, Laura. People like that don't just disappear when they're fired. She sounds obsessed with David, and now you've taken him from her. Laura hadn't considered that angle. You think she might cause problems? I think someone who hires private investigators to stalk their boss's girlfriend isn't mentally stable. Rachel squeezed her sister's arm. Just watch your back, okay? The warning cast a slight shadow over Laura's happiness, but she pushed it aside. Victoria was gone. They could move forward now without her interference. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Miss you already. Dinner tonight at 7, just us. The message sent warmth spreading through her chest. She typed back, I'll be there, can't wait. Rachel observed her lovesick expression with amusement. You've got it bad, sis. Laura couldn't deny it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Victoria's potential retaliation, balancing her medical career with a new relationship, navigating the complexities of becoming part of Theo's life, in a deeper way she knew with absolute certainty that David Whitmore was worth facing them all. Her clinical rotation that day seemed to fly by, even Dr. Marshall's notoriously grueling rounds failing to dampen her spirits. She was checking a patient's chart when her colleague James Sullivan approached, his expression unusually serious. Hey, Laura, got a minute? She nodded, following him to a quiet corner of the nurse's station. What's up? I had a strange encounter this morning, he said, keeping his voice low. A woman stopped me in the parking garage asking questions about you. Said she was an old friend trying to reconnect, but something felt off. Laura's stomach tightened. What did she look like? Tall, dark hair, expensive clothes. Very polished, but with this intensity that was unsettling. Victoria, it had to be. What did you tell her? Nothing specific, just that we work together sometimes. But Laura, she knew details, which rotations you're on, that you're interested in pediatrics. He frowned. Should I be concerned? Are you in some kind of trouble? Laura shook her head quickly. No, nothing like that. She's an acquaintance with boundary issues. I'll handle it. James didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Okay, just be careful, all right? And let me know if you need anything. The encounter left Laura uneasy. Victoria was escalating, moving from background investigation to direct interference in her life. She debated whether to tell David, not wanting to worry him, but also recognizing that he should know what his former assistant was doing. In the end, she decided to wait until their dinner that night. No sense in disturbing his workday over something that, while concerning, wasn't an immediate threat. She arrived at the Whitmore house promptly at 7, surprised to find the driveway empty of cars. Usually David's sleek black sedan was parked near the entrance. Perhaps he'd put it in the garage for once. The front door was unlocked, which struck her as odd. She stepped inside cautiously. David? No answer. The house was eerily quiet. No sound of Theo playing or Mrs. Winters moving about the kitchen. David, Theo, anyone home? She moved through the foyer toward the living room, unease growing with each step. A light was on in David's study, the door ajar. Laura approached slowly. David, are you in there? The door swung open before she could reach it, revealing not David, but Victoria, poised and perfect in a tailored black dress. Her smile was cold as winter. Laura, right on time. Laura froze instinctively, taking a step back. Victoria, what are you doing here? Where's David? David and Theo are at the hospital. Victoria's voice was calm, almost pleasant, which somehow made it more terrifying. Food poisoning, apparently. Something they ate at lunch. Nothing serious, just unpleasant. David asked me to wait for you, let you know. Relief mingled with confusion. Why didn't he call me? Victoria shrugged elegantly. He tried, said your phone went straight to voicemail. He was rather distressed, poor thing. Theo was quite ill. Laura reached for her phone, finding it dead. She'd been so busy at the hospital, she hadn't noticed the battery draining. Still, something felt wrong. If they're at the hospital, I should go there. Which one? Columbia Presbyterian. But there's no need to rush. David said they're already feeling better, just waiting for final clearance. Victoria gestured to the living room. Why don't you sit, have a glass of wine, while you wait for my call, confirming they're on their way home. Every instinct told Laura to leave to verify Victoria's story directly. But if David and Theo were truly ill, I think I'll head to the hospital anyway, she said carefully. Just to be safe. Victoria's smile tightened fractionally. Always the dedicated medical student. But really, Laura, there's no need. In fact, David specifically asked that you wait here. He doesn't want Theo overwhelmed with visitors when he's feeling fragile. Laura edged toward the door. Then I'll just wait in my car. I need to charge my phone anyway. You don't trust me. Victoria's voice hardened. After everything I've done for this family. I don't know what you mean, Laura said cautiously. Victoria moved closer, her perfectly manicured hands clasped before her. 2 years I've been by David's side, supporting him, guiding him, protecting him from those who would take advantage of his grief. And then you arrive a nobody, a liar, and suddenly I'm discarded like yesterday's trash. The bitterness in her voice confirmed Laura's worst fears. This wasn't a concerned colleague relaying information. This was a woman scorned dangerous in her rejection. Victoria, I understand you're upset about losing your job, but that was David's decision, not mine. Laura kept her voice steady, reasonable. Whatever you think is happening between us, I know exactly what's happening. Victoria snapped, her composure cracking. I saw you together last night. The touching, the kissing, the sickening declarations of love, as if you could possibly understand what David needs. Laura's blood ran cold. Victoria had been watching them, spying on their most intimate moments. You need to leave Victoria now before David gets home. Victoria laughed, the sound sharp-edged and brittle. Oh, David won't be home for quite some time. The invitation to dinner, that was me using his phone while he was in a board meeting. He has no idea you're here. Understanding dawned horrifying in its clarity. Laura backed toward the door, calculating the distance, her chances of reaching it before Victoria could stop her. What do you want, Victoria? What do I want? Victoria's voice rose slightly. I want what's mine, what I've earned. I want David to see you for what you really are, an opportunistic little schemer who seduced her way into his life through his vulnerable child. That's not what happened, Laura protested. I never planned any of this. Of course you did, Victoria hissed. Do you think I don't recognize ambition when I see it? A struggling medical student drowning in debt suddenly lands herself a billionaire. How convenient. The accusation was so far from the truth that Laura almost laughed despite her fear. You don't know anything about me or how I feel about David. I know more than you think, Victoria countered, moving to block Laura's path to the door. I know about your father's heart attack when you were 12, your mother's car accident 6 years later, the 2 jobs you worked through undergrad to support your sister, the student loans you'll be paying off for decades. The detailed knowledge of her personal history sent ice through Laura's veins. How long had Victoria been investigating her? How deeply had she delved into Laura's past? And I know, Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, that you're not nearly good enough for David Whitmore. Laura squared her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated despite her racing heart. That's for David to decide, not you. He's not thinking clearly, Victoria insisted, blinded by a pretty face and a few moments of physical comfort. But I can make him see the truth. And how do you plan to do that? Laura asked, trying to keep her talking while inching toward the door. Victoria smiled, a terrible, empty expression. I had a whole elaborate plan, you know. Evidence of misconduct, suggestions of unprofessional behavior with patients. But then I realized sometimes the simplest solutions are best. With a fluid motion that spoke of careful planning, she reached into her purse and withdrew a small revolver, its metal surface gleaming in the dim light of the foyer. Laura froze, blood draining from her face. Victoria, think about what you're doing. This isn't going to solve anything. It solves everything, Victoria replied calmly, her hands steady as she aimed the weapon. Poor David, falling victim to a disturbed young woman obsessed with replacing his dead wife. How could he have known she would break in, ransack his home, threaten his son? He'll need support after such a traumatic event. He'll need me. The cold calculation in her voice chilled Laura to the bone. This wasn't an impulsive act of jealousy. It was a carefully constructed scenario. Victoria had thought this through, planned every detail. People will know it was you, Laura said, fighting to keep her voice steady. James Sullivan saw you asking about me today. Rachel knows I came here to meet David. There will be evidence. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Victoria's face, quickly masked by determination. Details, easily managed. No one will question the grieving CEO protecting his home and child from an unstable intruder. Laura's mind raced, searching for a way out. The front door was too far, Victoria too close. But the house was large if she could reach the kitchen or upstairs. What about Theo? She asked, desperate to find some crack in Victoria's resolve. How will he feel losing someone else he cares about? Haven't you seen how much he's already suffered? For the first time, Victoria hesitated. Theo will adjust. Children are resilient. I'll help him forget you just as he's forgetting Elizabeth. The comparison was obscene, revealing the depth of Victoria's delusion. She truly believed she could replace both Elizabeth and Laura in the lives of David and Theo, erasing them as if they had never existed. You don't understand love at all, do you? Laura said softly. It doesn't work that way. People aren't interchangeable parts you can swap out when convenient. Victoria's eyes hardened. Spare me your sentimental platitudes. Love is a chemical reaction, a biological imperative easily manipulated by proximity and circumstance. What you feel for David isn't special, it's predictable, ordinary. What I offer is loyalty, understanding, a shared vision for the future. If that were true, you, Laura countered, he would have chosen you already. But he didn't, Victoria. And killing me won't change that. Something dangerous flickered in Victoria's eyes. Enough talking. Turn around. No. Laura refused, instinct telling her that turning her back would be fatal. Victoria raised the gun higher, aiming directly at Laura's chest. I said, turn around, Victoria. The deep voice from the doorway startled them both. David stood there, his face ashen, eyes fixed on the gun in Victoria's hand. David. Victoria's composure faltered momentarily before she recovered, quickly shifting the narrative. Thank God you're here. She broke in, was going through your office. Stop, David interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. I heard everything, Victoria, every word. Victoria paled. You don't understand. I was protecting you, protecting Theo, by threatening the woman I love at gunpoint. David took a careful step forward, his movements slow and deliberate. Put the gun down, now. Victoria's hand trembled, the weapon wavering between Laura and David. You can't choose her. After everything I've done for you, everything we've built together. We haven't built anything together, David said firmly. You worked for me, Victoria. That's all it ever was. The harsh truth seemed to break something in Victoria, her face contorted with rage and hurt. Liar, you needed me. After Elizabeth died, I was the only one who understood, who knew what you needed. What I needed, David cut in, was to heal, to move forward. You kept me frozen in grief because it gave you power over me. The accusation hit its mark. Victoria's control slipped further, the gun shaking visibly in her hand. That's not true. I loved you. I still love you. David's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained wary. Victoria, this isn't love. This is obsession, and it needs to stop now before someone gets hurt. For a tense moment, Laura thought Victoria might actually pull the trigger. Then from behind David came a small voice that shattered the standoff. Daddy, what's happening? Theo stood in the doorway, clutching his stuffed elephant, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Victoria's gaze snapped to the child, her expression crumpling. The gun lowered fractionally. Theo, go upstairs. David ordered, his voice calm but firm. But Theo had spotted Laura. Laura, are you okay? Victoria stared at the little boy, at the genuine concern in his face as he looked at Laura. Something in her seemed to collapse, as if seeing through Theo's eyes had forced her to confront the reality of what she was doing. Slowly, the gun lowered to her side. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. David moved forward cautiously. Give me the gun, Victoria. After a moment's hesitation, she complied, the fight draining out of her. David quickly secured the weapon, then guided Theo to Laura. Take him upstairs, he instructed quietly. I've called the police. They should be here soon. Laura gathered Theo into her arms, her whole body trembling with delayed shock and relief. Are you okay? She asked David. He nodded grimly. Go. I'll handle this. As Laura carried Theo upstairs, she heard Victoria's voice, broken and small. I just wanted you to see me. To really see me. David's response was too quiet to hear, but the gentleness in his tone spoke of compassion rather than condemnation, even in the face of what Victoria had almost done. In Theo's room, Laura sat on the edge of his bed, the little boy clinging to her as if afraid she might disappear. Was that lady going to hurt you? He asked, his voice small. Laura stroked his hair, searching for words appropriate for a 4-year-old. She was very confused and sad, sweetheart. Sometimes when people are very teen, they do things they shouldn't. Like when I threw my blocks because I missed Mommy. The simple comparison nearly broke her heart. A little like that, yes, but much bigger. Grown-up sad can be very powerful sometimes. Theo nodded solemnly, processing this in his own way. I'm glad you're okay. Daddy would be very sad if you got hurt. I would be very sad too, Laura whispered, holding him close. I love you very much, Theo. I love you too, he replied simply, the words natural and unforced. They stayed like that until the sounds of police radios drifted up from downstairs, until David's footsteps on the stairs signaled that the immediate crisis had passed, until the night settled around them like a blanket, reminding them all that they had survived to see another day together. Later, after the police had taken Victoria away and Theo had finally fallen asleep, Laura and David sat in the kitchen, hands clasped tightly across the table, the events of the evening hanging heavy between them. I should have warned you, David said, his voice rough with emotion. After I fired her, I should have known she might do something drastic. Laura squeezed his hand. We both underestimated her obsession. It's not your fault. When I came home and heard her voice, heard what she was saying, he shuddered. If anything had happened to you, Laura. But it didn't, she interrupted gently. We're all safe, that's what matters. David brought her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her palm. I meant what I said, you know. What she heard me say. Laura tilted her head, questioning. That I love you, he clarified, his eyes holding hers. I love you, Laura Martinez. Tonight made me realize how easily I could have lost you before I ever got the chance to say those words. The declaration, coming after such intense fear and relief, brought tears to Laura's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. So much it terrifies me sometimes. Good, he said softly. We should be a little terrified. It means this matters. He rose from his chair, drawing her up with him into the circle of his arms. There in the quiet aftermath of chaos, they held each other, hearts beating in sync. The promise of tomorrow stretching out before them, a promise made sweeter by the knowledge of how easily it might have been lost. Outside, the October night settled, deeper stars emerging one by one in the vast darkness. Inside, two people who had found each other through chance and choice clung to the precious gift they'd been given, the chance to build something new from the ashes of what came before. And upstairs, a little boy slept peacefully, paper stars watching over him, keeping the nightmares at bay for another night. The weeks following Victoria's arrest passed in a blur of police statements, newspaper headlines, and whispered conversations. Laura found herself navigating unfamiliar territory, not just the public scrutiny that came with being connected to the Whitmore name, but the intensely private process of building a relationship amid trauma and healing. Victoria had been charged with attempted murder, illegal possession of a firearm, and stalking. Her lawyer was pursuing an insanity defense, claiming that grief over losing her position and unrequited love had triggered a psychotic break. The tabloids were having a field day with the story CEO's assistant goes rogue. Love triangle turns deadly at Whitmore Mansion. Each headline more sensational than the last. Through it all, David remained a steady presence, shielding both Laura and Theo from the worst of the publicity. They had agreed not to hide from Theo what had happened. Children sensed when adults were concealing difficult truths, but to explain it in terms he could understand. Victoria had been very sick in her mind, they told him. She needed special doctors to help her get better, and that's where she was now. On a crisp November morning, Laura stood in the kitchen of the Whitmore house, watching through the window as David and Theo built a leaf pile in the garden. The sight warmed her heart, David laughing as Theo cannonballed into the rustling mound, leaves flying in all directions. These moments of simple joy had become more frequent in the aftermath of Victoria's attack, as if the brush with violence had reminded them all how precious ordinary happiness could be. The doorbell rang, pulling Laura from her reverie. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to answer, expecting the delivery of Theo's new winter coat. Instead, she found Rachel on the doorstep, her expression tight with concern. Laura, I've been calling you for hours. The anxiety in her sister's voice was unmistakable. Sorry, I forgot my phone upstairs. What's wrong? Rachel thrust a newspaper into Laura's hands. Not the tabloids this time, but the respected New York Times. The headline made her stomach drop, Whitmore Foundation under investigation for financial irregularities. Laura scanned the article quickly, her heart racing. According to unnamed sources, the charitable foundation established in Elizabeth Whitmore's memory was being investigated for misappropriation of funds. The insinuation was clear. David had been using his late wife's cancer foundation for personal gain. Where did you get this? Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It's everywhere, Laura. TV, internet, everywhere. Rachel's eyes were sympathetic but worried. Have you talked to David about it? Before Laura could answer, she heard the back door open, followed by Theo's excited chatter and David's deeper voice. She quickly folded the newspaper and tucked it under her arm. Theo burst into the hallway, face flushed with exertion and happiness. Rachel, he exclaimed, throwing himself at her for a hug. His unquestioning acceptance of Laura's sister as part of their extended family never failed to touch her. Rachel scooped him up, her worried expression softening. Hey, little man, those are some serious leaf remnants you've got there. David appeared behind Theo, his smile fading as he registered the tension between the sisters. His gaze dropped to the partially hidden newspaper, and Laura saw understanding dawn in his eyes. Theo, why don't you go upstairs and get cleaned up? David suggested gently. Then maybe you and Rachel can make those leaf rubbings we talked about. Once Theo had thundered up the stairs, David turned to Laura, his face grave. You've seen it then, she nodded, pulling out the newspaper. Is it true? David's laugh was bitter, humorless. No, God, no, but that won't stop the speculation. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. I should go. Let you two talk. David shook his head. No, stay, Rachel. You're family now, and we don't keep secrets from family. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of stress. I knew something like this might be coming after I fired Victoria. The question was what form it would take. You think Victoria's behind this? Laura asked, though the answer seemed obvious. Who else? David led them into the living room, his movements tense with controlled anger. She threatened as much during her exit interview, said if I humiliated her, she'd return the favor. I just didn't think she'd go after Elizabeth's foundation. The cruelty of the attack, targeting not just David's reputation but his late wife's legacy, was breathtaking in its calculation. Laura sat beside him on the couch, taking his hand in hers. What can we do? David squeezed her hand gratefully. I've already called an emergency board meeting. We'll issue a statement, open our books to scrutiny. The foundation's finances are impeccable. Elizabeth made sure of that from the beginning, but mud sticks especially when it concerns money and cancer patients. The pain in his voice was palpable. Laura leaned against him, offering silent support. Rachel watched them, her expression thoughtful. You know, she said slowly, this might actually work in your favor. David looked up surprised. How do you figure that from a career perspective? Rachel continued. Victoria's already made herself the villain in the public eye with the whole armed confrontation thing. If this accusation can be tied back to her, it becomes part of a pattern of vindictive behavior, not a credible allegation. I never thought of it that way, David admitted. Rachel shrugged. I took some communications classes before switching to business admin. The point is, if you get ahead of this, frame it as the desperate act of a disturbed former employee, you can actually come out looking more sympathetic. Laura looked at her sister with newfound respect. That's actually brilliant, Rach. David nodded, considering. We'd need to be careful not to appear to be attacking Victoria personally. Mental health issues shouldn't be weaponized. But you're right. Context matters here. The sound of Theo's footsteps on the stairs ended their conversation. For now, they would protect him from this new development. He had been through enough already. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. David threw himself into defending the foundation, working closely with his legal team and the board to prepare a comprehensive response to the allegations. Laura divided her time between the hospital, where she was completing her final rotations, and supporting David and Theo at home. Home. The word had slipped into her thinking without her noticing. Somewhere along the way, the Whitmore mansion had become more than just David and Theo's residence. It had become the place where her heart felt most at peace. Not that peace was in abundant supply at the moment. The investigation story had triggered a fresh round of media interest in their relationship. Laura's fellow medical students had seen the articles, and whispers followed her through the hospital corridors. Even Dr. Marshall had pulled her aside to ask if the personal complications he'd noted earlier were related to the Whitmore situation. Yes, she had admitted, but I'm handling it. My work won't suffer. Dr. Marshall had studied her for a long moment before nodding. See that it doesn't. And Laura, be careful. Men like David Whitmore live in a different world than the rest of us. The rules are different there. The warning had stayed with her, not because she doubted David, but because it reflected a concern she'd harbored herself, that their worlds were too different to truly merge. That eventually the novelty of loving a struggling medical student would wear off, and David would realize he needed someone from his own social stratum. She was pondering this as she entered the Whitmore house one evening later than usual after a difficult shift. The entryway was dark, which was unusual. Normally lights would be on, welcoming her arrival. David, Theo, she called, setting down her bag. No answer. A prickle of unease ran down her spine, memories of Victoria still fresh enough to trigger caution. She reached for her phone, ready to call David, when she noticed a faint glow coming from the living room. She moved toward it cautiously, then stopped in the doorway, her anxiety melting into wonder. The room had been transformed. Dozens of paper stars hung from the ceiling, catching the light of what must have been 100 candles placed around the room. In the center stood David, handsome in a dark suit, his eyes warm as they met hers. "What is this?" she asked, stepping into the room, her exhaustion forgotten. David approached her slowly. "Do you know what today is?" Laura thought quickly. Not her birthday, not his, not any holiday she could recall. She shook her head, puzzled. "6 months ago today, you walked through my front door for the first time," he said softly. "You folded a paper airplane and my son smiled for the first time in months. You changed everything, Laura, everything." The significance of the paper stars wasn't lost on her. A reference to the constellations she had created for Theo, the small magic that had first connected them all. David took her hands in his. "These past weeks have been challenging. The investigation, the media attention, the strain on all of us. But do you know what I've realized?" Laura shook her head, her throat too tight for words. "That none of it matters. Not compared to this, to us." He released one of her hands to gesture around the room. "I never thought I'd feel this way again after Elizabeth died. I thought that part of my life was over, but you proved me wrong." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Laura's breath caught. This was happening too fast, too soon. Seeing her expression, David smiled. "Relax, it's not what you think. Not yet." He opened the box to reveal not an engagement ring, but a delicate silver key. "This is a key to the house," he explained. "Not just for practical reasons, though. Those exist too. It's a symbol, an invitation to make this your home whenever you're ready, on your terms, at your pace." Relief mingled with profound emotion as Laura stared at the simple key. After everything, the deception that had begun their relationship, the violence that had nearly ended it, the public scrutiny they now faced, David was offering her not a fairy tale ending, but something far more valuable, a choice. The freedom to decide her own path forward. "I don't expect an answer tonight," he continued when she remained silent. "This isn't a moment for impulsive decisions. It's just me saying that whatever comes next, the end of your medical training, the start of your residency, wherever your career takes you, I want to be part of it. We want to be part of it." Laura looked up to see Theo standing in the doorway, pajama-clad, and grinning clearly in on the surprise. The sight of him, of both of them, offering her not just love, but partnership, understanding, support for her dreams and ambitions, broke something open inside her. "Yes," she whispered, taking the key from its velvet nest. "Yes to all of it." David's smile was radiant as he pulled her close. Theo ran to join them, wrapping his arms around both their legs in a three-way hug that felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. Later, after Theo had been tucked into bed, stars glowing softly on his ceiling, Laura and David sat in the garden wrapped in blankets against the November chill. The media frenzy, the foundation investigation, the looming challenges of integrating their lives, all seemed distant concerns compared to the simple rightness of being together. "I've been thinking," David said, his voice contemplative in the darkness, "about what happens after your graduation." Laura tensed slightly. This was the conversation she'd been both anticipating and dreading. The practical reality of how her demanding medical career would fit with his established life. "The pediatric residency at Columbia is my first choice," she began cautiously. "It's highly competitive, but Dr. Marshall thinks I have a strong chance, especially if I can bring my clinical evaluations back up to where they were." David nodded. "It's an excellent program. 3 years, right? 3 for the general pediatrics track, 5 if I decide to specialize further." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. The commute from here would be challenging. Over an hour each way, longer in bad weather. Laura's heart sank. This was it. The moment where their different worlds collided. "I know," she acknowledged. "I've been thinking about that too." David turned to face her, his expression serious in the faint light. "What would you think about getting a place in the city? Something closer to the hospital? A pied-à-terre for during the week?" Laura blinked, surprised by the suggestion. "You mean, for me, for us," he clarified. "Theo's preschool is only 3 days a week now, and he'll be starting kindergarten next fall. There's no reason we couldn't split our time between here and the city. I can work from anywhere, and it would give Theo exposure to urban living, museums, cultural experiences." The thoughtfulness of the proposal, not asking her to commute or sacrifice her career, but restructuring his own life to accommodate her dreams, left Laura momentarily speechless. "You'd do that," she finally managed. "Upend your routine, Theo's routine, just to make my residency easier." David took her hand, his touch warm despite the cool air. "Laura, listen to me. This isn't a sacrifice. It's an investment in our future, all of us. I want Theo to see what it looks like when people support each other's dreams. I want him to know that love doesn't mean giving up who you are. It means making space for each other to grow. The words were a balm to fears Laura hadn't fully articulated even to herself, that loving David and Theo would eventually require her to choose between them and the career she'd worked so hard to build. Besides, David added with a smile she could hear in his voice, the foundation headquarters is in the city anyway. I've been commuting out here every day since Elizabeth died because I couldn't bear to be away from Theo. But now we could be together, all of us, Laura finished for him. In both worlds. Exactly. As they sat in comfortable silence, starlight filtering through the bare branches above them, Laura felt a sense of possibility unfurling before her. Perhaps Dr. Marshall was wrong. Perhaps the different worlds they inhabited weren't incompatible after all, but complementary, each enriching the other in ways neither had anticipated. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. David was meeting with the foundation board to address the investigation allegations, while Laura had a full day of rounds at the hospital. They parted with a quick kiss at the front door, the domestic normality of the moment, belying the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. At the hospital, Laura threw herself into her work with renewed focus. The key David had given her hung on a chain around her neck, tucked beneath her scrubs. A tangible reminder of the life waiting beyond these walls, but not a distraction from the importance of the healing work before her. She was reviewing a patient's chart when Dr. Marshall approached, his expression uncharacteristically approving. Your diagnosis on the Henderson case was spot on. Martinez, he said. Subtle presentation easily missed. Good work. Laura smiled, grateful for the validation. Thank you, sir. The atypical symptoms reminded me of a case study from your pediatric neurology seminar last year. Dr. Marshall nodded, pleased at her reference to his teaching. By the way, he added, seemingly casual, I had an interesting call this morning from the Whitmore Foundation. Laura's pen froze mid-notation. Oh, apparently they're expanding their pediatric oncology research program, looking for medical residents with interest in the field. The director specifically mentioned your name as someone they'd like to have apply. Laura felt her cheeks warm. I didn't know anything about that. Dr. Marshall studied her face, finding confirmation of her sincerity. I believe you, which makes it all the more interesting. The caller was quite specific that this wasn't preferential treatment. All applicants would be evaluated on merit alone. They just wanted to ensure you were aware of the opportunity. Relief washed through Laura. David hadn't pulled strings for her, though. He'd simply ensured she had the same information as other candidates. She could apply, or not, based on her own interests and qualifications. I appreciate you letting me know, she said carefully. Pediatric oncology is definitely an area I'm considering. Dr. Marshall's gaze was shrewd. Your personal connection to the Whitmore family has become rather public knowledge, Ms. Martinez. I trust you understand the importance of maintaining clear professional boundaries, especially if you pursue this path. Absolutely, she agreed firmly. I would never want special treatment or to compromise the integrity of my work. Good, he nodded, because you have genuine talent. It would be a shame to see it overshadowed by personal entanglements, however well-intentioned. With that mixed blessing and warning, he moved on to the next patient, leaving Laura to ponder the complex intersection of her personal and professional lives. David had created an opportunity, but it would be her responsibility to prove herself worthy of it, perhaps working even harder than other candidates to avoid any perception of favoritism. The challenge didn't frighten her. If anything, it energized her. This was the reality of loving David Whitmore. Her accomplishments would always be scrutinized through the lens of their relationship, but she was determined to build a career that stood on its own merits, one that Theo could look at with pride as he grew older. Laura helped sick children. She imagined him telling his friends with the simple confidence of a child who knows his family's worth. That evening when she arrived at the Whitmore house, their house now in a way that still felt surreal, she found David in his study surrounded by papers. His face lit up when he saw her, the stress lines around his eyes momentarily softening. How was the board meeting? She asked, perching on the edge of his desk. Better than expected, he replied, pulling her closer for a kiss. We're issuing a comprehensive statement tomorrow, opening our financial records for independent audit, the works. The board is fully supportive. Laura smiled, relieved. And how did they react to? David's expression turned wry. There were some raised eyebrows, a few concerned questions about optics and timing, but Elizabeth's parents were there. They're still on the board, and they shut down any insinuations pretty quickly. Her heart warmed at this unexpected support. Elizabeth's parents had always been a concern for Laura. Would they resent her presence in their grandson's life, see her as trying to replace their daughter? This suggested otherwise. I'd like to meet them properly, she said softly, when the time is right. They'd like that too, David assured her. They've been asking about you, about the woman who got Theo talking again. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Laura remembered her conversation with Dr. Marshall. So she began trying to keep her tone light. The Whitmore Foundation is expanding its pediatric oncology program. David had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Ah, you heard about that. Yeah, it's been in the works for months, actually. Elizabeth's vision was always to combine treatment with research, especially focusing on rare childhood cancers that don't get as much funding. And the specific invitation for me to apply that was Catherine Whitmore's idea, actually. Elizabeth's mother. She's a retired physician herself. When I mentioned you were considering pediatrics, she suggested we make sure you knew about the program. He met her gaze directly. I promised Laura there's no special treatment involved. You'd be evaluated just like any other candidate, Laura believed him. David's integrity was one of the qualities she most admired about him. Still, she needed to establish a boundary here for both their sakes. I appreciate that, she said carefully, and I might apply. But if I do, I need you to stay completely out of the selection process. No checking in, no asking about my application, nothing. It has to be legitimate, David, or I can't do it. He nodded, understanding immediately. Absolutely, I'll recuse myself entirely from that aspect of the foundation's work if you decide to apply. Thank you, she said, relieved at his easy acceptance of her terms. Now where's Theo? I brought him something from the hospital gift shop. David smiled, closing the folder he'd been reviewing. In the kitchen with Mrs. Winters allegedly helping bake cookies, more likely eating the dough when she's not looking. Laura laughed, sliding off the desk. Sounds like my kind of cooking assistant. As she headed toward the kitchen, David called after her. Laura, I'm proud of you for maintaining your own path through all of this. It's one of the things I love most about you. The simple affirmation warmed her more than he could know. In the chaotic merging of their lives, it was these moments of mutual respect and understanding that convinced her they were building something that could last. December arrived with a flurry of snowflakes and end-of-semester exams. Laura practically lived at the hospital and library, coming home to the Whitmore house only for brief hours of sleep before returning to her studies. David supported her marathon study sessions with care packages, late-night texts of encouragement, and by ensuring Theo understood that Laura's temporary absence wasn't abandonment, but dedication to her calling. When her final exam was completed, a grueling 8-hour clinical assessment that left her mentally drained but triumphant, she returned to find the house transformed. Garlands of evergreen draped the staircase, twinkling lights adorned every window, and in the living room stood a magnificent Christmas tree, as yet undecorated. We waited for you, Theo explained, bouncing with excitement as he dragged her toward the boxes of ornaments. Daddy said we had to do it together as a family. The casual use of that word, family, still had the power to stop Laura in her tracks. She looked over Theo's head to where David stood watching them, love evident in his eyes. Is that okay? He asked softly. I know you might have your own traditions with Rachel. Laura thought of the tiny artificial tree she and Rachel usually set up in their apartment, the handful of ornaments they'd salvaged from their parents' house, the bittersweet memories of holidays past. Then she looked at Theo's eager face, at David's hopeful expression, at the fresh possibilities stretching before them. It's perfect, she said, throat tight with emotion. But maybe Rachel could join us. Blend our traditions a little. David's smile was answer enough. By evening, Rachel had arrived with her box of childhood ornaments, ready to add them to the Whitmore collection. As Christmas music played softly and Theo chattered excitedly about Santa's imminent visit, the four of them created something new together. Not erasing the past, but building upon it, honoring what came before while embracing what could be. Looking at the completed tree, with its eclectic mix of elegant glass baubles and homemade childhood crafts, Laura felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what healing looked like. Not the absence of scars, but the creation of beauty that incorporated them, acknowledged them, transformed them into something meaningful. The investigation into the Whitmore Foundation had been officially closed the week before the allegations dismissed as baseless. Victoria remained in psychiatric care, her legal proceedings delayed, while she underwent treatment. The media interest had largely moved on to fresher scandals, leaving them to rebuild their privacy and sense of security. David approached, slipping an arm around Laura's waist as they admired their handiwork. "Happy," he murmured into her hair. She leaned into him, watching as Rachel helped Theo place the star atop the tree, his small face alight with concentration and joy. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "Happier than I ever thought possible." Later that night, after Rachel had gone home and Theo was asleep, dreams of sugar plums presumably dancing in his head, David and Laura sat before the fire, the tree lights casting a multicolored glow across the room. "I have something for you," David said, reaching into his pocket. "An early Christmas present." He handed her a small envelope. Inside, Laura found a brochure for a Manhattan apartment building, a photo of a sun-filled corner unit paperclipped to the front. "I found it," he explained as she examined the pictures. 3 bedrooms close to Columbia Medical Center. The building has a doorman, 24-hour security, important given recent events, and a small garden on the roof. "What do you think?" Laura flipped through the photos, imagining their life in this new space. Theo's bedroom overlooking the park, a home office for David, proximity to the hospital for her grueling residency hours. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "But can we afford it? I know you're wealthy, David, but New York real estate is astronomical, and I'll be on a residence salary for years." He took her hand, expression serious. "First of all, money isn't an issue. I could buy the building outright if it made sense to do so. But I understand your concern about independence, about feeling like an equal partner." Laura nodded, grateful for his understanding. "So I thought we could structure it this way," he continued. "The apartment would be purchased in both our names. You'd contribute what you can toward monthly expenses, an amount that works with your residence salary, not something that would create hardship. We'd establish a household account for shared expenses, with each of us contributing proportionally to our incomes." The thoughtfulness of the proposal, acknowledging both the reality of their financial disparity and her need for autonomy, touched Laura deeply. This was what real partnership looked like, not pretending differences didn't exist, but finding equitable ways to navigate them. "What about the house here?" she asked. "This is Theo's home, his security, and it was Elizabeth's home too." David nodded, acknowledging the importance of the question. "We'll keep it, of course. Come here on weekends, holidays, summers, when Theo's not in school. This will always be part of his heritage, his connection to his mother. I would never take that from him." Laura studied the brochure again, allowing herself to imagine this next chapter of their lives. A foot in two worlds. The peaceful suburb where their relationship had begun, and the vibrant city where her career would take shape. It wasn't a compromise, but an expansion, a life richer for containing both. "When do we see it?" she asked, decision made. David's smile was radiant. "Tomorrow if you are free. The owner is a friend. He's holding it for us through the holidays." "Perfect," Laura agreed, setting the brochure aside to kiss him properly. For this moment, for this night, the future could wait. Right now, she wanted only to be present in this quiet hour of contentment, grateful for the unlikely journey that had brought them together. Christmas morning dawned, clear and cold sunlight glinting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Laura woke to find Theo already bouncing on the end of the bed, barely containing his excitement. "Santa oim," he announced loud enough to wake David, who groaned good-naturedly beside her. "Come see." They followed him downstairs in their pajamas, coffee mugs in hand, to find the tree surrounded by presents. Theo tore into his gifts with abandon. The new bicycle he'd been hoping for, books, games, a child-sized lab coat with Dr. Theo embroidered on the pocket, Laura's special gift inspired by his recent interest in her medical books. For David, Laura had chosen a vintage first edition of his favorite novel, found after weeks of searching specialty bookstores. His face when he opened it, surprise giving way to deep appreciation for the thoughtfulness behind it, confirmed she'd chosen well. When all the presents seemed to be opened, David reached behind the tree and produced one final package, small and elegantly wrapped. "One more," he said, handing it to Laura. "From both of us." Inside, she found a velvet jewelry box larger than the one that had held her house key. Opening it revealed a silver charm bracelet already adorned with several meaningful symbols, a small paper airplane, a star, a stethoscope, a tiny replica of Theo's stuffed elephant. "It's beautiful," she breathed, touching each charm gently. "Look underneath," Theo instructed, practically vibrating with excitement. Laura lifted the bracelet's velvet lining to find an envelope tucked into the bottom of the box. Inside was a formal-looking document, adoption papers with Theo's name and Laura's spaces for signatures not yet filled. She looked up stunned to find both David and Theo watching her intently. "It's not activated yet," David explained quickly. "Just prepared for whenever, if ever, we reach that point. It's entirely your decision, Laura. No pressure, no timeline. But I want you to be my real mom." Theo added, his small face serious with the weight of his declaration. "Not to replace my first mom, but to be my now mom. Dad said you could think about it for as long as you need." Laura's vision blurred with tears as she pulled Theo into a fierce hug. The gesture overwhelmed her, not just the legal implications, but the emotional significance. This wasn't just David inviting her into his life, but both of them offering her a permanent place in their family. When she could finally speak, she looked at David over Theo's head. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," he assured her, joining their embrace. "It's a possibility, not a demand, something for us to consider as we move forward together." The rest of Christmas Day passed in a happy blur. Breakfast with Rachel, video calls to Elizabeth's parents, who greeted Laura with unexpected warmth, an afternoon of board games and cookie decorating. Through it all, Laura kept touching the charm bracelet on her wrist, the weight of it a pleasant reminder of belonging, of being cherished. That night, after Theo was finally to sleep amid his new treasures, Laura and David sat on the window seat in their bedroom, watching snow begin to fall again, blanketing the world in pristine white. "Are you happy?" Laura asked softly, echoing the question he had posed to her on the night they decorated the tree. David considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "After Elizabeth died, I thought happiness was something I'd experience only in retrospect. Memories of what had been never again something I'd feel in the present tense. Then you came along with your paper airplanes and your medical textbooks and your determination to help a little boy find his voice again." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You didn't replace what I lost, Laura. You helped me build something new from the ashes. Something different, but equally precious. So yes, I'm happy. Profoundly so." The simple honesty of his answer moved her deeply. In the quiet of the snow-muffled night, Laura found herself thinking of the long, strange journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate lie told to help her sister to a truth more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. "If someone had told me a year ago that covering Rachel's shift would lead to this," she mused, "I would have thought they were crazy." David smiled, tracing the charms on her bracelet with gentle fingers. "Life's like that sometimes. The most important journeys often begin with the smallest steps taken for reasons we don't fully understand at the time." Outside, the snow continued to fall, each unique crystal adding to the transformative blanket covering the world. Inside, wrapped in the warmth of their newfound family, Laura and David watched in comfortable silence, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring, but quietly eager to discover it together. In the room down the hall, Theo slept peacefully beneath his canopy of paper stars, secure in the knowledge that he was loved, by the mother who lived among those stars, and by the woman who had taught him to reach for them. And in that simple certainty lay the truest magic of their unlikely story, that hearts once broken could not only heal, but grow larger in the healing making room for new love, without diminishing the old. As midnight approached, marking the end of Christmas Day, Laura looked at the adoption papers once more, then at the charm bracelet with its meaningful symbols, each one marking a milestone in their unexpected journey. The decision crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. "I've made my decision," she said softly, turning to David. His eyes met hers, patient and hopeful. "And well, yes," she said simply, "to all of it. The apartment, the adoption papers, this life we're building. It won't always be easy, but it's ours." David pulled her close, the relief and joy evident in his embrace. Through the window, snow continued to fall, each flake a testament to how something so small like a paper airplane folded on a stormy night could transform everything. In Theo's room, paper stars watched over his dreams, no longer just a child's comfort, but a perfect metaphor for what they'd created, a family constellation formed from separate lives now shining as one. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now hummed with the quiet promise of tomorrow, a fitting reflection of hearts that had found not just healing, but renewal within its walls.